Peace, this is Kasabez Makama, and this is The Black Present. Welcoming you guys again. At this point, for those of you who have been watching the series, you know what I mean by Black Present. For those who haven't gotten familiar with that, please just refer to some of our other posts that we have on onepeopleproject.org. Again, that's onepeopleproject.org. Check us out and sign up for our newsletter. You'll be getting all types of updates and new information. We're updating, again, new content just about every other day. So, yeah, I'm excited to present this information to you, and hopefully you're excited to receive it. So if you are, again, check us out at onepeopleproject.org. We're also on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. So we're getting, still getting on the ball on Facebook. Twitter and Instagram. Facebook is definitely active at One People Movie. The other two are that's the number One People Project for Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. So check us out. Also YouTube and, again, this content is going to keep coming, so I'm just happy to be able to bring it to you. So our topic today is going to be on African kingdoms. Well, the thing I hear nowadays, or not even so much lately, but I used to hear a lot, is that in Africa we used to be kings and queens. That's kind of a nice kind of a romantic way of thinking about it. Yeah, you could say for sure in Africa we had kings and queens. Obviously, everyone was not a king and a queen. Um, if everyone's a king and a queen, then what does king or queen really mean? Because everyone can't be a ruler. So if there's people who are like the leaders of the society, if everyone's a king or queen, what do you call them? Um, well, obviously in pre-colonial Africa, they didn't speak English, so they had their words for their leaders. And everybody, of course, or I should say everyone, for those who don't know, the society functioned in a much more harmonious way where the leadership is not based on trying to con, the populations into following them to their own demise, basically. So, as we see in today's societies. So, be that as it may, let's get back to Africa. This notion of we were kings and queens has a very important connotation, and that important connotation is the word. That is put in past tense. That's put in a situation where, we look at that as history. That's why I was very intentional to call this the Black Present, because we're talking about the present. We're talking about what Africa is now. And in Africa, it might be little known, or at least little talked about, that there's kings and queens there now that are not just, figureheads like the king or queen of England, but they actually have real power. They actually have real, let's say, legitimacy with their people, and their people follow them for real. It's not, it's not just there for decoration. Um, so let's get started with the talk today. The talk today really, I want to start back in history a little bit, a little while ago, not too far ago, actually not even 150 years ago, that there was the Berlin Conference that took place in Africa, or not in Africa. It took place in Berlin, actually, but it was about Africa. This conference took place in the late 1800s, around maybe 1890 or so. Um, Again, 1890 sounds like a long time ago, less than 150 years. So that would be maybe a few generations ago. So if we can look at it like that, it's not really, maybe if you look at your great-great-grandparents, they probably were alive at that time. Maybe even your great-grandparents. So not that long ago, to be honest. So let's start there. The Berlin Conference. The Berlin Conference was um, it was a conference amongst the royalty, or let's say leadership, of the European nations who were trying to conquer Africa. The problem they were running into is that they would, maybe France would conquer one area, England would conquer another area, or let's say, no, they wouldn't conquer. They sent explorers. And when they sent explorers, they would do weird things like go to different villages of African people and say, hey, let us leave our flag here and sign this contract. And you can just sign it with an X. If you don't know English or you don't have a signature, you can just sign it with an X, what have you. And so they didn't know that they were signing contracts that said that your land belongs to us now, and that this flag represents that this nation or that this village or whatever city, what have you, now belongs to England or France. So that's what they would do. These explorers would go, and of course they would have their small contingent of soldiers and stuff like that. But they didn't come in guns blazing. They came in with this kind of trickery. Now, what would happen is that some of these explorers would reach into the same places, and then France and England or Portugal or Italy or Germany or whatever, they would run into each other, and they'd say, no, this is for me, no, this is for me, no, it's for me, no, it's for me. Interestingly enough, fighting over something that they call maybe unclaimed land, because they don't recognize the people who live there as actually being people, or actually being humans. So they say this land is unclaimed, and then they'd be fighting over who claimed it first. So they tried to settle those disputes and say, okay, which territory belongs to who, and so on. So that's what the Berlin Conference was about. Following the Berlin Conference, I'd say around the time of the end of World War I, after Germany was defeated, they had to regroup and reorganize and kind of come up with a map that would become pretty much the same map that we have today as far as the divisions of borders of the different countries. At that time, they were called territories. Now, before I get into that, I want to make a side note. Basically, did you know that this sub-Saharan Africa that they were fighting over in this time, again, end of World War I, now we're talking 100 years ago, almost exactly 101 years. So, not that long ago. This sub-Saharan Africa was the last place in the world, outside of maybe Antarctica, that had not been yet colonized. The last, let's say, habitable place known on the planet that had not yet been colonized. North and South America had been colonized. Asia had been colonized. Australia had been colonized. Maybe some islands in different places had not yet been colonized. Pretty much any other place had been colonized at this time. Europe, of course, was the first one. Before Europe started colonizing, Europe first was colonized, and Europe was the first region to fall to the colonization process. By the time they got to Africa, they had a very, 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 let's say, refined. I don't like the word refined here, but we'll go with that. Refined, or let's say developed way of conquest. They had used it over and over and over again over the rest of the world. So what they brought to Africa was at its highest, most effective state. Now, I want to just go back and say Africa was the last place to be colonized. So that should say something to you guys about Africa. Nowadays, today, it's like, because it was the last place to be colonized, it's not further, it's not as developed as other places that had been colonized previous to it. There's a direct correlation there. But let's say that the fact that it was the last meant that it was the last one to be. I mean, it must have been something that made it more difficult than the other places. So I would like to say that, credit should be given there as well. So at this time when the colonizers were coming, they were coming with their strategies. I'm not going to get into the strategies here. That's another conversation. But the point of this whole conversation here is just to say that um, when those colonizers came, they came with an education system. They came and found ways to take certain, um, let's say, certain children. They didn't have to take all the children, they just needed some of them. They took some of the children away from their parents, educated them away from their parents at boarding schools. Some of them were even taken to the countries that had colonized their countries. And in many of the cases, these people are coming in basically with the attitude that they're adopting, these poor African people as their children who they have to teach civilization to. This was the kind of racist attitude at the time that, black people don't have civilization, they need to be taught civilization. So there were many people calling themselves like philanthropists and charity workers and things like that. Similar to like how you have nowadays with the Peace Corps and stuff like that. Same pretty much concept that you go and you're helping these poor people over here better themselves because they don't have what it takes on their own. So at the same time, some of the kings and chiefs of different places in Africa were either tricked or bribed or coerced or somehow, seduced into this idea that they should send their children to Europe to be educated. So you have, let's say, down the line you go, because this is now happening, depending on which region you're talking about. I mean, let's say I think the Portuguese made it to Congo as early as, just before Columbus mysteriously discovered America. Um, the Portuguese, where I think, aren't they the ones who sent Columbus, or maybe Spain, that same area? They were the ones who went to the Congo River uh, Delta and made contact with the first Congo Empire. Uh, and Yeah, so around that time was the first contact, but that's the first contact. Colonization is really like penetrating, you know, around the 1900s, 1800s, 1900s. And I think the last, ones to really get on the scene and get into Central Africa and the areas of Rwanda and Burundi, that was taking place around late 1800s. Um, so let's uh, let's move along here. You have this what you might call a cadre or an elite group of students who have been educated by the Europeans. These students have been, educated about democracy, about liberation, freedom fighters. Well, let's see. On this time, we're talking, 1940s, 1950s. They even know about all the Revolutionary War in the U.S., the Renaissance, the Revolution, and the French Revolution, the World Wars that took place, and so on and so on and so on. They know about all these things. So they know about all these great, so-called great philosophers and people who have, great renown in the West. They're learning all of this stuff, and they're being taught this, and they're somehow getting this idea like, wow, all these places fought for their freedom. We ourselves are not free. We don't have the freedom that we want. We want to be free too. All these ideas planted in the mind. Um, Obviously you have a real colonization that has happened. Um, or let's say they are really, being oppressed by these different European governments, but they don't know that there's a very clever trick being pulled on them. And the trick is that they go back trying to rally and fight for freedom only after they've been brainwashed by their oppressors. So, what do you think when they go and they fight for their freedom? What do you think type of government they're going to impose on their people once they are in control or have some, semblance of control? Of course, the type of control that they're going to have is going to be the same type that they've been taught to do. So instead of a model like what they have, by their governors or whatever from France, England, or whatever, they want a model closer to what America has or what England has or what France has, and so on. And I think around that time you have, in those same countries in Europe, they somehow mysteriously start to realize their error in, the great harm that they've done to these people. And most of the time when these revolutions took place, did you know that even the European countries did not even fight to remain in control? They said, oh, okay, sorry we were so bad to you guys. Well, look, if you ever need our help, we're there for you. And now in 2019, you still have France printing money for most of West Africa. You still have, different uh, countries, America, China, and so on, making sure to keep these African nations in debt with aid, relief, and giving aid, relief, and so on, always with the strings attached. That you have to do this, you have to do that. They're not really in control of their own countries. Even most of the valuable resources, the companies that took control of those big diamond mines, different plantations, and different fertile land, those same European companies still have control over those. And then in cases where, like in Zimbabwe, where they try to take that land back, in certain cases, and that's not even in all cases, um, taking it back, meant profound backlash from the so-called Western enlightened societies. So now today in 2019, again, like I said before, when those revolutionaries came and they took control of those countries, those revolutionaries with all their ideas, and I'm not saying anything bad about them, but you have to understand, if you've been educated by your oppressor, you're going to adopt his ways. And so they, that's why we have African governments are kind of the laughing stock, kind of a laughing stock, because you don't really, you can't really take them seriously with the corruption, civil wars, and so on. But those borders of those countries did not change from the time they were territories in Europe. They didn't change. And it's a very important note to make that before all of these Europeans came and drew their borders, that there were already borders there. There were borders there that have been established by the fact that this or that area was controlled by this or that kingdom, this or that, tribe or whatever lives in this or that area, this or that language group, and then they have their own customs, their own traditions, their own rulers. And they organize this way, Now, through the process of colonization, a lot of damage has been done to those traditional kingdoms. But what I want to make sure to tell you today, and the whole point of all of this, is that when we're talking about our continent, our motherland, and we're looking to go back there and really, have allegiance for our homeland. We want to go and contribute to that instead of giving our lives and generations upon generations and our children's lives and grandchildren's lives to continue to serve America. This place that we see, has proven over and over again that's not our home. If we're looking at Africa and we only see the failing democracies there, and we don't see the kingdoms that still exist in Africa today, it'll be hard not to go back over there and say, hey, well, you guys are doing democracy. Hey, we know more about democracy than you. We're from America. We know more about business. We know about this or that. But what we don't know is we don't know about our kingdoms. We don't know about our culture, our values, our languages. When we go back, it's important not just to go back with the attitude like we're the ones with something to give, but understand that we're the ones who also need to learn. We're the ones who need to go there and submit ourselves to the legitimate authorities that exist there today and take our place amongst our culture. We have been visiting one of the kings in the king of the Gumu kingdom in eastern Burkina Faso in 2016, and he's since made his transition. May his ancestors receive him well. His name was His Majesty Kupi Ndeli. Him and his queen were there speaking to us, and especially first it was her who really made the point to encourage us that we should, if we feel comfortable when we're there, we like being there, we feel at home when we're there, we should work to get our citizenship somewhere in Africa. She said it doesn't matter which place, but get your citizenship and go. And really that would put us in a position to be able to serve our nation. Which, if we're going to be traveling and we need passports and we need visas, we have to deal with those government agencies in order to travel. But I think the general point is come home someplace. I mean, everywhere we've been over in Africa, they are all telling us, come back. People who don't have any agenda or any kind of sales pitch. They're not trying to sell us something. They're just saying, come back. You guys are family. We see you trying to connect, then come back. And they've been encouraging us to do so. Now, when we go back, you know, please, I just want everyone to keep in mind that that there are still legitimately, stable, honorable, functional governments, traditional governments there. Traditional, whether you call them nations, tribes, kingdoms, they exist. And we have everything to gain by connecting with them. So, again, this has been The Black Present. If you enjoyed this video, you watched it all the way to the end, thank you. Visit us on onepeopleproject.org for more posts like this and other posts as well. And you all take care. Peace.